let's get rolling. And all we're gonna do, I just want to get you guys caught up with where the first hour was. Luckily, since we're recording, I just watched my first 3 videos. I know all my bad habits now, so hopefully it works.
The fact that you talk with your name.
I'm not saying anything.
You said lack of a better term.
I'm not gonna say anything.
Yeah, lack of a better term.
Okay, now it's on. You even asked for it to be on. All right.
What's a better term?
For lack of just like it's like an easier way to say it.
Either way to say what?
Whatever I just said.
If you were to say good, you could say like
Oh.
better. So like for lack of a better term, good.
Oh,
This
okay.
is not, it doesn't
Okay.
make sense. Not history. It really doesn't. Why do we argue semantics?
All right. Very good question. All right. Let's do this, guys. We're gonna flip over to the second page. We're not gonna do a tremendous amount of boxes. I'm sorry. The name 5 charts. If you were here yesterday, we did the first part of it. Mine looked a little bit different.
Ours are cooler.
So it's the main 5 geographic. The other day should have been the whole first page. And what we want to do is kind of move on to the second page and do at least a couple of boxes. I'm just going to get you guys caught up with where first hour was today. Morning session, was today. I love how you hang on every word. That's good. That's really, really good because I probably say some of the wrong stuff. We're just going to kind of get through Southwest Asia and South Asia today because these are kind of some bigger concepts. So why don't we just run through real quick and put down a couple of terms, starting first and foremost with Southwest Asia. All right, I probably should kill this here just because.
What was that guy's name?
John Green.
John Green. I was going to say Tom Green. That like.
Tom Green or John Green?
John Green AP World. Type in or go to my favorite. I put it into my favorites.
Okay.
Please make a post on Facebook wall. Check it out.
All right. For Southwest Asia, let's just put a couple things for Southwest Asia. Some stuff we've already talked about before, like Mesopotamia. Okay, just generally that region of Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent. That was a big thing that was kind of mentioned here. So were Hebrews and Judaism, as far as like one of the world's major primary religions. Well, that grows out of Southwest Asia at this point in time as well. The thing I want to spend a little bit more time talking about, though, today, as far as, and again, we're in the foundations era of Southwest Asia or the Middle East. The thing we want to focus on the most today is, let's put down one of the most significant empires in Southwest Asia at this time, which is the Persian Empire. Okay? Now, you guys remember a couple of things that maybe kind of come to mind when you say Persian Empire of way back when.
Persian roads.
Yes. Yeah, Persians had a great road system. No, that's absolutely true.
What?
What?
Isn't there like a TV show about Persian people?
Okay.
Sure, there's a lot of TV
Could be. You guys remember anything else about Persia in particular that they were very good at? They were very.
They split up government.
They split up their government really well, right? They were really, really good at more than anything else. They were really good at administration. They were good at running their empire really effectively. Okay. Remember the Persians? They had leaders like Darius and Cyrus were really effective rulers. Xerxes was that ruler that came on a little bit later who was not. Somebody said yes, Xerxes was a Jerxes, if you remember that. He was the guy that didn't rule with very much toleration and kind of like, if you want to call it niceness or what have you for his people. But the Persians were generally very tolerant people, and they had to be tolerant because they lived in this empire that included all of these different ethnic groups and all these different religious groups, and they had to be able to administer all of those people in a way that was effective here. All right, so that was the Persian Empire. Very effective, very tolerant. They run their empire very, very well. The next group that we want to put on, I know we're only putting 4 things on here, but the next one let's put on here is, let's put down this concept of what's called the Hellenistic Empire. Okay? The Hellenistic Empire, or the Hellenistic world, you could even kind of call that. All right? The Hellenistic world. What are we talking about when we say the Hellenistic world?
Persian culture.
Yeah, so like the Greek and Persian connection. Now when we say Greek and Persian connection, who's our Greek guy that's really responsible or kind of known for this mixing and blending, right? Absolutely. So why don't we just kind of along with that, put down the concept of Alexander the Great. Okay? Now, Alexander the Great, probably a pretty good guy to know about in these early days here. Alexander the Great, remember he was from Macedonia, which is like an area just north of Greece. Came from a pretty solid bloodline. His father was king of Macedonia. Alexander wanted to become the greatest conqueror in human history. And it really wanted to kind of seek revenge against the Persians. If you remember, the Persians had invaded the Greek city-states some years earlier, and Alexander wanted to get revenge for that. So Alexander goes on these long conquests. You guys remember how long Alexander conquered for? It was like, you know, it was a super, super long time. It was like somewhere from beginning to end anywhere, somewhere between, boy, around 10 years or so, I want to say. I don't know if I have the exact nature on there. But around 10 years or so of straight up conquering, actually not a little bit more than that, I want to say maybe 13 years now. I want to say he started at 20 and he died at 33. I want to say it was around 13 years or so of just straight up conquering. And if you guys remember the whole gravity of the world, all the places in the known world that Alexander was able to conquer, we had kind of said before. Conquers North Africa, gets Egypt, founds Alexandria, right? Conquers the old Persian Empire, conquers Asia Minor, just does all of this in the name of Greek culture. Now the reason why we kind of say all of this, everybody, is that because what Alexander the Great largely kind of conquers here, and what he kind of largely gets, is this whole notion of what's called the Hellenistic Empire. And when you say Hellenistic Empire, really what is that made up of? Hellenistic Empire, yeah, made up of what?
Like parts of Europe, and then like the southwest parts of Asia and like the northeastern parts of.
Okay, so it's like the together of all parts of Europe and parts of Southwest Asia. It's all together, and in particular, what does it mean in terms of like what type of cultures are going to be blended together now? When they say the Hellenistic, what are the two primary cultures that are going to be kind of like thrown in a blender and mixed up now? Greek and Persian, right? So it's a blended culture, right, of basically Greek plus Persian. That's really what the Hellenistic Empire kind of is, okay? Greek and Persian cultures sort of blended together. Remember what Alexander the Great did? Is that when he went on his journeys, he would bring Greek philosophers with him, for instance. He would tell his soldiers to marry Persian women. He had like a really, like, you know, he tried very specifically to try to get Greek and Persian culture kind of blended together. Now, Alexander never really saw that, because of course what happens to him? He catches a bad fever, right? He dies in Babylon. And he's never able to kind of see that through, but what does he do after he dies? Who kind of like, you know, who does he pass the torch to?
All of those like generals.
Yeah, he passes it to his three generals. I'm not saying necessarily you have to know all three of these generals' names. I can't imagine necessarily that would be the case, but do we know who it was? One of them was named Seleucus.
Ptolemy, and then it starts with an A.
Ptolemy, and the last guy, yeah, is named Antigonus, was the last guy. Probably the most important out of those two or three, though, are going to be Seleucus, because then what Seleucus created was what was called the Seleucid Empire. And then Ptolemy, he went to Egypt, and he created the Ptolemaic line of pharaohs. So all of his kids and kids' kids became Egyptian pharaohs. Yeah.
Are we going to remember like people like that you just
I think what you're going to find as you get a little bit further is that like understanding the people and kind of understanding all of this, what seems to be a tremendous amount of detail, is going to help you out later. But will there be a question that says like, who was Seleucus, or who was the names? They're not going to ask you something like that. They're not going to ask you something like that. I'm going to give you some practice tests and stuff like that as you go a little bit further. And trust me, learning the details and doing as best you can with all that stuff is going to help. But it is largely a lot more of a big picture class than I think people kind of think in the beginning. So I would say it is still kind of a combination of both, because I can never say, oh no, details are totally unimportant. They are, but maybe less than they were during the school year. Okay. All right, so we've got this blended culture, right? We've got the blended Greek and Persian culture.
Michaela Glenzie, please come to the main office. Michaela Glenzie to the main office.
Why don't we see that kind of through as our Southwest Asia, Middle Eastern culture. Let's go to the next one then on South Asia. All right, let's put a couple of just concepts down as far as what's happened in South Asia. What do we do for the first thing in South Asia is, let's say, first of all, India. Who are the people that are living in India in the earliest days? What do we call that culture? The Harappan/Dravidian culture, right? So let's just put that down on the list. The Harappan/Dravidians. And remember, the Harappans or Dravidians, they're like the dark-skinned Indians that had lived in South Asia for, really thousands of years. And they had established what was called Harappan society. Remember, the Harappans are the guys who built the toilets and the world's first sewage systems and kind of some other advancements. We don't know a ton about a lot of those people, though, because a lot of those cities were destroyed. But anyway, they're the people that are kind of leading South Asia in the early years. Okay, second on the list though, let's talk about who comes in and basically kind of conquers them. So from the Harappans or Dravidians, new group moves in. Alright, so this new group called the Aryans. Okay? Now the reason we call them the Aryans is what was the thing that really distinguished them as being different, these invaders that came in. They were lighter skinned, right? They were lighter skinned because if you kind of remember from this, the Aryans, remember, they basically came up here from more or less kind of Central Asia. The Aryans were also that group of people that were called Indo-Europeans. You guys remember talking in the early part about Indo-European migrations? These different people that settled various parts throughout the world. Some Indo-Europeans settled, for instance, Italy, and some Indo-Europeans that settled Persia early on. Indo-Europeans were these migrants several thousand years ago that were responsible for settling lots of groups of people. So, in essence, you'd say there are some connections, some cultural connections. And of course, the other thing with Indo-Europeans is you can catch some linguistic similarities amongst all the people who settle some of these far-off places. Well, one of the Indo-European groups, as we had said before, were these Aryans. Aryans move obviously into South Asia and change things up quite a bit. If we were to say what the Aryans kind of bring into South Asia, what's going to be their important thing? What are they maybe kind of known for?
Taking over.
All right, religion. Coming in, taking over, fighting. And the stuff that they kind of bring in eventually is the arrival of a new type of religion. Okay? So why don't we just put down on this next list here, the next spot, why don't we put something about new religion brought in and their new religion, okay, the religion of the ancient Aryans, basically, which is this polytheistic faith. What does that have as a kind of side component of it? What system is it?
Caste system.
The caste system. The new religion and then the caste system is brought in. And you guys remember now, and this new religion, by the way, which doesn't really have a name other than it just being called the polytheistic faith of the ancient Aryans, over time, this new religion, it's kind of important to point out, this new religion is kind of the basis for what's going to be called Hinduism later. It's not really called Hinduism this early on, it's just called the religion of the ancient Aryans, but that's basically what it becomes later on. Okay? Now, can somebody say something about this new religion they bring in? What are some of the components of this new Hindu religion and the way the caste system is kind of functioning along with it? Well, first of all, the caste system, maybe we should say that. What type of system does that kind of involve? What is it all about?
Untouchables.
Okay, so we got some stuff with this caste system here. Would we say the caste system is a free-flowing, fluid social system, or is it a separated, segregated one? Absolutely. So it is very much, as you can kind of call with any particular social class system, it's kind of like a social class system of a triangle, right? On the very top, you have the very fewest people. Okay? You guys remember actually who the people were on the very top of the...
Weren't they like the Brahmins?
Yeah, the very, very top, you have these people called the Brahmins, who basically did what type of jobs?
Like the
They're the priests. They're the ones who conducted religious ceremonies, exactly. So on the very top, you got Brahmins. The second class you basically have are your, for lack of a term, kind of like the aristocrats. Okay? Your landowners, not aristocrats. Is that what you said?
No.
Oh, I
You
thought
said
you were
lack
right.
of a better term.
Oh, sorry. Throw like a swear jar or something like that. Throw a quarter or something every time I say that.
And then it all goes really for life.
There you
right?
go,
throw it
yeah.
all in the pot.
It's not going to just go to your slush fund or something like that.
No. It's just going to go to really for life.
Okay.
Or we could buy a world ice cream.
Okay. Well, I already somebody already asked me that I was doing some interesting things for that thing too. So we'll see. All right. Second group is the aristocrats. Those are your your landowners, your pretty high level officials. Obviously not as high as a Brahmin. And then beneath that, obviously, you've got. As we said, the aristocrats, the other one that goes along with the aristocrats would be warriors as well. And then your bottom two classes. The bottom one, you're going to have peasants. And then second to bottom, you basically have like your what am I looking for?
Artisans.
Artisans,
Merchants.
merchants, artisans, things of that nature, absolutely. So, just threw a blank there. So you got your merchants, you got your artisans, everything like that. Okay, under this system, under the social caste system, remember, if you were a peasant, what was your social responsibility to be?
To take care of the Brahmin.
Well, certainly, right? And was it to be a friend with the Brahmin, though?
No, it's
To associate with them? Okay, so your responsibility was to stay completely within your caste, to only marry within your caste, to only have friends within your caste, to only be within that caste level completely. Okay? And part of the role of religion, basically, was to say that if you one day wanted to move out of that caste you had to lead a really, really great life doing the responsibilities of that particular system. Okay? What's that process called, by the way, where you could move up? Reincarnation. Remember that process of reincarnation. You die, and you live a great life as this particular member of a caste, you get to reincarnate it higher and higher up, until you finally get to live the life as a Brahmin priest, and if you live a great life as a Brahmin priest, and do what you're supposed to do, then what do you get?
Become one with the
Yeah, you get to become one, and this is where I don't like the language on this, because it doesn't, it's hard to sometimes explain this. Remember the name on top is Brahman, M-A-N, whereas the Brahmin is the priest. Again, are they going to trick you on a question on that? No. They're not going to make you necessarily know the difference. But just so you kind of see that at the top, it's not necessarily like going to heaven. It just means like you get reunited with the universal soul, which is the Brahman, and the Brahman is actually part of everything, is what this person would believe. But you guys just kind of simply see how the religion and the caste system are kind of like are basically like kind of more or less one and the same, right? They can kind of tell you that you have to do these responsibilities, you have to take part in these responsibilities, because it is largely kind of your religion and is your responsibility. Okay? Any questions on any of that? Is that kind of coming back to you here to a certain degree? It's kind of the beginnings of Hinduism. Okay. Who would be people? Oh, and by the way, we left these people out, very bottom. Who's our bottom people? The untouchables. Remember the untouchables? Did the worst jobs, handled dead bodies, scooped waste, things like that. And they were the people that, if you even had any contact with them whatsoever, that could make you unclean and could potentially drop you a social class. Throw a very specific term out there. Do you guys remember the specific term we threw out there? This could just be super impressive if you could throw this at them in an essay. Do you remember the specific term we said? That we said that society throughout the years became even more subdivided through different professions people would have. And you joined these little subcastes. It was called jati. Do you remember that? J-A-T-I? J-A-T-I or jati, which are those subcastes. Okay? Just made society more complex. And it just meant that when people started to have different professions, certain professions started to be more prolific than others. Okay? Who'd be the people, though, that would be very upset with this situation? Typically, people that would gravitate towards the lower part of social class are not going to be happy with it. What does that mean, then, over time, that people in the lowest part of society in India start to call for, start to want? Out of religion. Well, a revolution in terms of religion, right? Revolution in terms of religion means forming a new form of religion. So what type of new type of religion that's on the horizon here? All right, the next one that's going to come up basically out of Hinduism or out of what's seen as the unfairness of the religion of the ancient Aryans is, why don't we just say something about the beginnings of Buddhism. And the reason why this is going to kind of involve itself in this early part is this happens close to or pretty much around sort of about 500 BCE. Okay? The beginnings of Buddhism. If you think about somebody who believes in the tenets of Buddhism, because remember, by the way, who the founder of Buddhism is? He's a supporter of Buddhism. Yeah. The Buddha, I mean, his name's the Buddha. Before he's the Buddha, remember, he's a guy named Siddhartha Gautama. And I'm not saying you'd have to, like, produce that in the test, but if you heard that, would you know that he was the Buddha? Okay, that's kind of the idea of kind of where to be, maybe. Siddhartha Gautama, remember Siddhartha Gautama was a guy from the second to top class, but he was on that stroll through his village one day, and he ended up seeing the man having this unending suffering, and he was wondering to himself why suffering exists in the world. He went into that deep meditation about the true nature of suffering and desire, and how you can ultimately achieve peace and understanding in this terrible world that's full of suffering and desire. He ends up having personal reflection, personal contemplation, and comes out of all of his reflection and meditation with what he calls basically a couple of different tenets of Buddhist doctrine, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Right? The four things that are just the absolute truths of world, dealing with suffering and desire, and then finally the Eightfold Path, or the 8 things that you should have to do if you're a Buddhist. Okay? Ultimately, what does a Buddhist kind of believe? Is a lot of stuff very similar to Hinduism? Like, can you think of something that Buddhists and Hindus are very much the same on? The whole idea of like achieving positive karma, and actually both Hindus and Buddhists actually believe in reincarnation, but what does a Buddhist believe is possible, though? So both of them believe in the up and down process, right? But a Buddhist is going to say that there's a more of a direct route to the top, and that you don't have to go through all of the unfair social rules and responsibilities. And for instance, a lot of things people said you need to do is you needed to follow the specific prescriptions of what the Brahmin priests said you had to do. They had to take part in all your rituals and stuff like that. A Buddhist is going to say you have more of a personal, direct path to achieving the ultimate goal, which they reclassify and rename called nirvana instead of the Brahman. And that's where they say that you ultimately get, and you can ultimately get to it at one point in time. Last thing, Buddhism, as it spreads, what does it largely spread on? This will kind of pick this up tomorrow. The spread of Buddhism largely takes place on what trade route after this? The Silk Road. Because remember, Buddhism is something that forms in India, but from there it doesn't stay in India, it actually spreads to China and elsewhere. We'll get into kind of the rest of the story on why that happens. Remember the Ashoka Maurya and his support for